Welcome back to the channel Soapsters, and in today's video we're going to be looking at doing a Star Trek inspired soap using the Star Trek Delta. But first of all, I think what we're going to do is just go through using a master batch solution how you can add things in like citric acid and sodium lactate when using it. So on my little scales here, I have got a container that I'm going to mix these all into. So this is my little teaspoon measure. I don't know if you can see that. There we go, 1 teaspoon. So this is not accurate, and if you're going to be doing this commercially, you need to be using weight, but I'm just going to pop in 1 teaspoon of citric acid. Now, citric acid is a wonderful additive to add to your soaps if you work in or if you're in hard water areas, because it will help you get better suds and stop the scum. So I've popped that into my container here with just a little bit of water. So this is the water that you would add alongside the master batch. So when you have a master batch solution at 1:1, you will have 1 part water and 1 part sodium hydroxide. Now, you're normally always going to have more water than you have sodium hydroxide. There's always going to be a portion left over. So that portion that's left over has gone into here, and I'm just dissolving my citric acid and my sodium lactate into this before we get started. So that's what's happening in this little container here. So I've done that, and I'm going to add my sodium lactate in here as well. And again, it's around about 1 teaspoon, which is around about 5 grams roughly. There we go, 5.7. So working in grams is always good, because you know if it says a teaspoon, you know it's going to be around about 5 grams. So I would always encourage people to work in grams if you can do, because it does make maths a lot simpler. So once we've got those in there, I'm then going to add my master batch solution. Now, this is my trick for adding master batch lye into a container. Rather than pouring from the container onto the scales into the water and potentially going over, what you're going to do is put the container of your master batch lye solution onto your scales and then tear it out. What that then does is it allows you to measure off from one to the other using a pipette, or even like a turkey baster, really, from the master batch solution into the water that you've already got in this other container, and you can get it precise without going over or under, and you're always going to have that absolutely clean number, so that you can just make sure that you have the right amount of lye, and you're not going to be either having too much lye and losing some super fat, or too less lye and increasing your super fat. So that's a little tip there for working with this master batch lye. And the observant among you may notice that the scale number is actually going down. It's in a negative. However, a negative gram, removing a gram, is the same as adding a gram. So we're not really bothered by the fact that it says minus. All we want is for that number on the bottom there to equal the amount of master batch lye solution we need. So don't worry about the minus figure. All you're looking at doing is making sure that you are essentially taking away the amount of lye that your recipe says. And as long as that number on the scale at the bottom there matches the number that you have in your recipe, you will be absolutely fine. So don't worry about the fact it's going down. It's exactly the same weight that's being taken out of the lye solution that you would normally add to your lye solution. So just make sure the numbers match. So we are going to have to do a little bit of maths now, but what I've got here is my soap shape that I want to be able to work out how much of my batter I need for each part of my soap. So what I'm just doing here is I'm marking out where the top of the mould comes to, so I know that this is going to be the top, and my scraper is then going to come down into the mould. So you can see this top one here we're measuring. Now, this is a little bit of a kind of video of how to adapt to situations when they don't go quite right for you. So I want this to be around about this high off of the mould. So I know I need to put that much in the bottom, then come up with the other bits and pieces. So I'm just marking off all of the areas that I want in different colours. So we're also going to be looking at how we adapt to not making enough batter for your scraped layers, and how you can adapt that on the fly. And don't forget that with a lot of scraped layers, when you want to do a scraped layer, you want to realistically want to fill the gap rather than build the gap up as a mound, because if you're mounding up, you can always knock it and take it out of shape. Whereas if you're filling a gap, it's always better to do that. So you'll see here that I'm actually doing this upside down, and we're scraping out, and then we turn the soap over. So I'm just basically kind of trying to work out here what's going on with my mould and how I'm going to achieve that. So what I'm doing here is I'm marking down the side of my shape, and I'm doing it at 10 centimeters high. So I've got I'm trying to work out in tens because they're easier to work out. So I know that the top and bottom are going to be 15% of my batter, and I've got 70% in the middle. So I can always work out what weights I need for each one of those. Okay. Now what I want to do is get my shape so I can work out roughly how much batter I need for each bit. So I'm going to pop my delta in here, and I'm just going to draw around it so you can see how this is going to look in the mold. That's going to be the first one. And if I put the second one in, and you can see I've got that slightly in the wrong place. I need to get it aligned with the top and then draw in my second delta shape. All right. And there we go. We can see how that's going to come together and where it's going to sit in our mold. So I now need to work out how much of that 70% is going to be the shape and how much of that middle section is going to be the background. So what I'm doing here is just adding some horizontal lines, and then I'm also going to add some vertical lines. Now I need the vertical lines to also equal 10, so that the amount in the middle there I can work out as to what percentage of that 70% is going to be. So I've got 8 sections up. It's going to be that 70%. And then what we're going to do is mark along the bottom and the top to work out exactly how much of that we are going to need. So I'm just taking the width of that bar. I'm creating my, so it'd be, I think it's 7 across divided by 10 will give me the roughly what amount I need to mark that into tens, because I want to have 100 squares. It makes life a lot easier. And so what you'll see now is I'm going to start colouring these sections in and then mark them to the side. So I'm roughly trying to arrange these so I've got one whole square, and I'm then just tallying them off to the side. And all that's doing is allowing me to work out how much of that 70% each area is going to be, and therefore I can kind of work out how much batter I need for each piece. And it's as simple as that. So take your time doing it. I made a mistake on this, and we're going to deal with that mistake a little bit later on, so you can see exactly what I need to do in order to correct my mistake. What we're going to do is mix our colours up, and I'm going to mix the colours per oil, because what this does, I find, is keeps a more consistent colour throughout the batch. And what I mean by that is if I'm using 3 colours in this, so I'm going to separate out the oils for each colour. So the weight of oil for each colour is going to be separated out, and I'm going to colour that oil before I add the lye. So even if I'm splitting that colour down into 2, I know that that colour is going to be consistent throughout the batch. And it just means that I can keep an eye on my colours easier than if I'm trying to say it was a teaspoon of this and a tablespoon of that, or 3 grams of this and 5 grams of that. I always find the colour comes out a little bit odd. So if you colour the whole batch of oil first before you add the lye, it just means you're going to get a more consistent colour with that batch. Now, as you can see here, I'm actually using pre-mixed oxide. So this is black oxide, and I'm using oxides throughout this because I just think the colours are really nice and intense. You can mix them, and I keep them in these little squeeze bottles mixed in oils. Now, they do separate out and you need to give them a good shake, but I do find this is a really nice way of getting some really consistent colours, particularly with things like reds and yellows, which sometimes can be a little bit drab with micas. You get a better colour doing it this way. So if you really want to get some nice intense colours, you can use these oxides in conjunction with micas. So you can bolster a blue a little bit and give it a little bit more punch with a blue. If you've got a green that you maybe want to just tip into the kind of yellowy green, adding some of that yellow oxide is great. But yellow and red in the oxides really give you that punch of colour that sometimes the micas miss the mark on. So do by all means have a look at them and pre-mix them. It's far easier, far cleaner, and less kind of poofy of particles of this colour going everywhere. If you do pre-mix them into oils, it's adding some super fat. You're not going to lose very much out of it. If you use it like olive oil the whole time, and you are doing this commercially in the UK, you can pull a little bit of your batch oils out and add in the amount of the oils that you're using in your mixes. Just keep a note of everything that you're doing, because obviously we in the UK have to adhere to our rules and regulations, and you need to just know exactly what's going into a soap. So That's my little tip for using oxides pre-mixed. So now we're going to move on to actually making our layers, and I'm pouring off the black layer here for the first section. That's really important that you stir your oils before you pour off any, so that the colour remains consistent throughout the whole batch and the whole amount of layers that you're going to do, so that you don't lose that consistency in colour. And then you add the appropriate amount of lye solution to those oils and they're ready to go. Now I am going to use an accelerating fragrance oil in this because I do want the layers to set up quite quickly. And this is a really good way of using up those fragrance oils that are going to accelerate your trace quite considerably, and you can use it to your advantage in this and set the layers up quicker and therefore make your scraped layer soap quicker. So I've brought our mould in here and I'm just going to pour this in very gently. I've got some bubbles in there, but these are probably going to dissipate and be absolutely fine. And this is just our first layer, so we're going to get that in there, scrape out the little pot here, and then let this set up and get on to pouring our second layer, and we'll come back for the scrape. Kind of at this point I'd realised we'd done something a little bit wrong and I hadn't calculated my soap particularly well in regards to the amounts I required for each layer. So the soap is perfectly fine, but I just hadn't quite got my quantities correct for what I needed in order to do this soap. So there are two things that's really important to understand about this. First thing is you really need to have more soap than you need because you're scraping out and you want to be able to use it all, and also you want to measure your mould correctly and get the right amounts in there. So I didn't do either of those things. So you'll see here that the mould itself is deeper than I expected it to be. Therefore, my scrapers were not quite long enough to do exactly what I wanted to do. And I had to kind of make this work. And how am I going to do that? Well, I've used half of my blue here. Now, because my blue is going to be all the same colour because I pre-mixed it, at least I did that much, I can pop all of my blue in. Now, this is going to leave me a little bit of a problem because we've got the kind of V shape. This is the infill for the logo itself. And then I've got the scraper here, which I'm then going to have to use to create another little dip, which I realistically wanted to fill with blue, but I'm not going to have enough batter or enough oil to be able to create that small amount of soap. So I'm going to kind of twist and chop this round a little bit. So I'm kind of realizing here that this is not going to work and how I'm going to make it work. So I'm actually going to make up a second lot of soap and I'm going to cut the tabs off of my first scraper. So I can actually get it a little bit lower into the mold, and then I can actually scrape the second bit a little bit lower. So my delta is actually going to be a little bit shorter than it should be, but it's still going to look like it should. And then we'll deal with the last layer in a little bit. And thankfully it was black, but this is something you could do on the bottom of all of your soaps just to make it work. So this is the second lot of soap that I need to get sorted. In with the fragrance oil, we're going to get this mixed up and we'll come back when we're kind of scraping this first layer for the second time. So I'll speak to you in a second. We have now finally got our batter up to a consistency that's going to work for us. And what I'm doing is I'm scraping all of my excess bits into the container that the blue came from, so that if I need to fill in any sections, I can do that. But I'm also looking to utilize any of this excess to give me enough soap for our final layer. So I'm going to scrape all of this out here, and then this is going to go into this little pot here, and literally any soap that I've got left over from any scrapings, any colour, I'm actually going to reuse that in my final layer, and I'll show you how it works in a minute. But you can see here, I'm just taking my time scraping along, bringing up any of that excess and making sure that I'm getting some relatively flat sections either side. And then what we'll do is come back when I fill that second section in with our yellow. So let's bring in our yellow here, and we're going to make this up. Now this is a very small amount, so I only need a very small amount of our lye solution into this one. And again, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. We pop our lye solution up on there, and then we measure from the lye solution into our oils. Makes it very easy to kind of do. And then we'll get this poured in, and we'll get the second scrape going. So we've got that in there now, and we're going to get it into our mould. And you'll notice I just tipped the mould ever so slightly to pour this in, just so I can pour it down the side, and I can make sure that it hits all of that kind of very bottom area. So it can be quite difficult to make sure you get right into those bottom sections, particularly if your fragrance oil is setting up. So by doing it this way, I can just make sure that it's kind of creeping into that area quite neatly. Then what you can do is just let it kind of flow in like that, and then add a little bit more of this in here, and then we're going to just drop that colour right the way in. Give it a little bit of a shake at the end just to make sure that it really settles into that. And again, because this fragrance oil accelerates, I don't want to take it too thick, so I can't pour it, but it's going to set up quick enough that I'm going to be able to do this scraped layer. So let's just wait for this to set up while I scrape this out, and we'll come back ready for the scrape. What you will notice, however, is it is a lot lower. I've straightened out the two edges there a little bit, and I'm going to make sure that my scraper that I use in the next section is going to scrape away some of that blue, and you'll see what I'm then going to do with our black. So here is our black colour, and you'll notice now that I'm going to put the batter that I've scraped out in here already. And then when I add the lye solution to this, we can incorporate all of that kind of thickening batter, and it will make it just liquid enough that I can pour it into that last section and make up the rest of the mould. Now, obviously, in the little divot of my Delta logo, I am going to have a bit of a gap where I should have had blue, but it's going to be black. But for the purposes of this, it works. It means you can get this soap out. The soap is still usable, and it could go in like a dents and scratches pile, or it could be discounted. So you can still sell the soap, and it still looks good, but it's not quite what I wanted. So this is a way of just being able to use all of your batter up absolutely with no wastage by just incorporating anything that's scraped off or anything like that back into that final layer. But it does need to either be a dark colour or a kind of combination of colours that you want, and I tend to just do it with a black, so I've got that kind of black colour going on. You can of course just scrape that into a mould separately. So what I'm going to do now is just get my spatula here, and I'm kind of creating a divot in the centre of this and pulling it up so that the yellow meets the edge of that blue on that scraped layer. So I've got less that I need to kind of move around, and I can get it really nicely into all of those little areas there. Excuse the head for a second. So once I've got into that position there, I can take our scraper and I can then just scrape this this particular layer. But you'll notice here that the tabs are now missing off of this scraper, and that's because I needed to drop it down a little bit lower into the mould because I hadn't got quite enough batter. And then all I'm going to do is scrape this layer very slowly, very deliberately, and then all of that excess is going into my black oil for that final layer to be poured. And again, this does take kind of multiple passes that you need to just allow to kind of take off a little bit at a time. If you try and take off too much, you're going to ruin the overall effect. So just take it scrape by scrape, layer by layer, very gently, very slowly, and then you will eventually get this really nice looking scraped layer in the center. So let's just clean up our edges a little bit here, and I'm doing this for two reasons. I want the edge to be nice and neat, but I also want to make sure that I've got enough of this black color to fill the mold right in the bottom here. So as much of that as I can get into there as possible is going to be ideal. So let's just get all of that into this black, get it stirred through and then poured in, and this will be our final layer. So we're now ready to get this in. So what I'm going to do is make sure that I pour it straight into that little gully so we get all of that in there. And I've just managed to get enough batter out of that to give me my last layer in this soap. So the purpose of this video is to show that, again, sometimes things go wrong or you're having a bad day, your head is not in the game, and sometimes you go, oh, I've mucked up. But there are ways around these things. There's always a way of getting enough batter from what you've got. You may have to adapt your design slightly, but don't panic over these things. Don't think, oh, it's ruined. Just think about it laterally for a little while and you'll come up with an idea that will make sure it works for you. So let's get into cutting this soap. So it's always worthwhile to pop these sorts of soaps where you've had them in the freezer, or, in an acrylic mold in the freezer first. And then they're easy to unmold. You leave them just to kind of make sure that they come back up to room temperature fully, and then you're good to go. So let's just have a look at this soap here. Now I went with the blue middle, but you can go with a red or a gold or even green. So you've got all of the colours there you can use. And let's have a little bit of a look at this. So there we go. There is the Star Trek soap. And as you can see, that bottom bit is still nice and black, so you've still got it in there. It would have been nice to have the blue in the middle section, but it wasn't to be. And I still think it's a pretty good looking soap after all. And it's just one of those things is sometimes you have to go with the flow a little bit and change things up on the fly. But ultimately, you are still going to get a really nice looking bar of soap. And again, you can then adjust your recipe accordingly. You've got a nice bar that you can maybe put into your dents and scratches pile, or you can sell it off as a unique one-off. It's entirely up to you. So that is the Star Trek Delta soap using scraped layers. I hope that's been useful for you. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. It really helps me grow and allows me to make more videos and tutorials for all of you. When you subscribe, don't forget to click the bell icon if you'd like to get notified when a new video is uploaded. And thanks a lot, Soapsters. I'll see you again next time.